Hello? I didn't see you there. Boss Allen here. Did the butler let you in? Oh, the butler lets everybody in. So, to what do I owe the pleasure today? We have no need for you today. We're still analyzing the data smuggled out of the gatekeeper's lair from back when I was captured.
It is I who let them in.
No, not my younger brother, Suave Allen.
That is right, older brother. It is your younger and much more suave and handsome and all around better at everything, brother, Suave Allen. Ha 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 ha. And I have just returned from my gallivantings around doing rakish and handsome and suave activities because word was sent to me that you are having difficulties with the gatekeepers.
No, Suave Allen, I do not need any help. Yes, I may have had some difficulty by being captured, but I escaped with the help of the Knights of Alexandria, and I came back with some very valuable data.
Well, it was our mother who sent the message, dear old Mumsy, and so I returned with assistance in your endeavors. Accompanying me from lands abroad are the rich and powerful dukes, Duke Peter, Duke Saunders, and Duke Christian. And also the Knights of Fortune, Sir Adrian, Sir Joe, and Sir Jess. They have come to help you since you are apparently incompetent.
Very well. We welcome them into the ranks of the Knights of Alexandria. Now please, little brother, leave my domicile.
Hi guys, and welcome back to the Library of Alexandria. And today, guys, I have another tag video for you. You probably knew it before I even said it because you saw these handy dandy note cards within mine hands. And so this tag today is going to be the Get to Know Your Fantasy Reader tag. So it's been almost a year, close 9 months or so, since I've been on BookTube, and I have not yet done this one because when I started BookTube, I couldn't have actually done this one because I had not actually read a ton of fantasy other than like Dungeons and Dragons books, and then Black Company and some Malazan books, and then Discworld. Not pretty much, I mean, that's not all of it, but that is a lot of it. But now that I have almost a year of BookTube under my belt, that'll make you read for sure. So I am going to do this. I think I was tagged by Leslie to do this like 6 months ago, and I just didn't. In fact, I haven't done tags in a hot minute. I did one earlier this week. Last week? I don't know. But I'm going to do another one. So this is 10 questions about getting to know me, your fantasy reader, for today. So without wasting any more time,
Let's get down to business.
question numero uno. Question 1. What is your fantasy origin story? Meaning, how did you come to read your first fantasy novel? So, my parents divorced when my brother and I were young, and so we spent summers with my mom, who worked, and so we could not stay at home being tiny children. I would not have trusted a tiny child at home alone. And so my mom had a friend with 2 sons that were similar to my brother and I's age. And so she took care of us during the day while my mom was at work one summer. And I think I was like 9. It was like right before 5th grade. Maybe I was 10, 9. I don't know. It was right before 5th grade, and my brother's 3 years younger, so he was just out of 2nd grade. Anyway, this kid, his name was David. James was his brother. I know his brother. Joseph. His name was Joseph because his brother was James and there were 2 J's. I remember it now. I have not thought about these people in years. Anyway, guy named Joseph and his brother James, he ran a D&D campaign. It was the first time I ever played D&D, and I was a Bozak Draconian named Fyran, and I was a wizard. I was a mage. And my brother was a lizard man fighter named Blood Crunch, and he used a halberd. And that was my first exposure to D&D, getting to play a race that isn't in the actual rule book, and just learning how to do that. We were monsters, and that's what we did. I think James was a dwarf. And I liked D&D so much, my mom got me D&D books, but the first thing I got was the Monstrous Compendium, and if you played 2nd edition D&D, like way before, 5e or whatever, Monstrous Compendium came in a binder, and it wasn't the Monstrous Manual, the freaking monsters had 3 hole punches, and you just flip through. And I tried to learn how to play D&D from the stats on the freaking monster manual. I was like, Thaco, what the crap is Thaco? And so it wasn't until a little later that I got my Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master Guide, and literally learned from remembering playing with them, and then reading through the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master Guide. Now, I told you that story to tell you this one. He is the one that recommended me read both the Cleric Quintet, which starts with Canticle, and also Legacy by R.A. Both are by R.A. Salvatore, but Legacy is actually the first of the 3rd trilogy, well, really a quartet, the third set of Dritz books. And so the first fantasy book I ever read was The Legacy by R.A. Salvatore. So I read Legacy, and then I read Passage to Dawn, and Starless Night, Siege of Darkness. Passage to Dawn wasn't even out yet. And then I read the Cleric Quintet, and then I went back and read the other Dritz books. And so that is my fantasy origin story. I started with D&D, and a guy recommended me a D&D book. Boosh. Question number 2. If you could be the hero or heroine in a fantasy novel, I probably could have just said hero since I'm a guy. Who would be the author, and what's one trope you'd insist on being in the story? Ugh. So, I mean, Discworld would be fun. Like, so Pratchett writing my story, I would have such a zany life. I think Sanderson from Mistborn that I read would write me like a cool, like, adventure tale. I'm gonna say I want to say Sebastian de Castell, but the punishment he puts his main characters through is not something that I want to suffer. So maybe Josiah Bancroft from the Books of Babel, because he's created this steampunkish Victorian kind of feel world, which is kind of like my aesthetic that I really like in my books. And it's all very cerebral, but also, you know, there's action and, you know, found friendship and found family and, you know, excitement and good times on the high seas, but like on airships. And a trope that I would need to be in this book there's a couple. One, even though I don't love this in the books that I read, I would really like the animal companion trope to be in my particular novel, because I don't really like it, but I think it would be awesome to be able to, you know, go, Storm, go tear him up. And then Dritz says Guinevere, like that freaking panther tear anything up. Guinevere, go, Gwen. So I would really like to have like an animal companion, like a badger. You can hold up like a, just like throw it, like escape. And you just throw it and the badger like latches onto someone's face and just drags them like to their warren and, you know, eats them. Or has them for tea and go on a wild motor car race with Mr. Toad. Regardless, I think an animal companion would be really awesome. And the other one, Here Comes the Cavalry, because I love Here Comes the Cavalry way more than a lot of people do. I love it when, like, oh no, there's danger, and then and they just ride in and save the day. And this would ensure that I do not die in said story. So those are my answers to that one. Boosh. Number 3, what is fantasy you've read this year that you want more people to read? So, my default answer is Discworld. I want all of you to read Discworld. I've read Discworld this year. I've read Discworld many years. You should all be reading Discworld. And the conversion rate of Discworldians is increasing, and this pleases me greatly. The kick I'm on right now is the A Long Price Quartet, which I finished this month. And it is just so different than anything I've ever read, really. It's not your typical fantasy. It's just not. It reads much more like Greek tragedy or Shakespearean tragedy, but with easier language. But it has these big moments happening, but on a small, like, intimate kind of scale. Like, all of the conclusions, well, most of the conclusions are really powerful and really tense and really emotional, but they're also intimate and quiet, as opposed to these huge, like, earth-shattering conclusions that, you know, tends to be standard fantasy fare. And I love me some earth-shattering conclusion. You give me a huge battle, that's awesome. And these aren't for everybody. They are not action-packed in the sense that you would normally think of, even though a whole lot does actually happen. But it's very much about, like, how do you bring down economies? Like, can you do it in the military? Can you do it, like, through tampering with their trade? Like, it's just about what does it mean? Like, the Long Price Quartet, it's called that, like, because these characters pay the price for their choices. What is the price for loyalty? What is the price of doing the right thing? The first book sets the groundwork for that. What is the price of justice? And are you willing to pay it? What's the price of setting things aright? Are you willing to pay it? And I just love the way it explores these complex relationships among the characters. Character work is just fantastic. And the relationship between all of them, like, it's just really, really good. And it's not talked about a lot, and I get, because it just is kind of different, and it's kind of a slower, more subdued fare. But Long Price Quartet is really, really good. Please read it. If that even sounds remotely interesting to you, you should read it. It's really, really good. Boosh. Question number 4. What is your favorite fantasy subgenre, as Alex Trebek would say? What subgenre have you not read much from? So, my favorite fantasy subgenre is, it's actually kind of, it wars back and forth. So here are a couple that kind of vie for the top spot. So I love military fantasy because I love the concept, I just love watching war play out in books and in fiction. This might be just because I'm a classics student and a student I'm a history student also. So the Japanese Sengoku Jidai, which is the Warring States period of Japan that ended in 1600, that's fascinating to me. The frickin' Peloponnesian War and all of the warring poleis in Greece, and then Rome, which is nothing but war, like Rome, total war. It's just interesting to me, tactics and the relationship with the soldiers on the field and the people commanding them. I just really like military fantasy. Now, some military fantasy tends to be really grim and ponderous, and grim is not super my aesthetic. It's not really my thing. Like, if you haven't seen Mark over at Slowly Read, his grimdark kind of guide video, you should definitely watch it. In it, he gives a new name to a type of grimdark called Grim Heart, where it's not all bleak. There's hope within it. And that's really more of my genre. Because military fantasy can be pretty bleak, but the ones that have like the Greatcoats is a really good example of this. Parts of the Greatcoats are incredibly bleak and incredibly sorrowful and tragic, but there is hope at the end. Same thing with Long Price Quartet. Even Malazan is not like super grimdark. I would put Grim Heart with Malazan. So I really like that kind of subgenre of military fantasy. I also really like swashbuckling fantasy, and swashbuckling fantasy is just like, it's like if Indiana Jones, National Treasure, like any of those adventure, like high-octane adventure heist action movies were turned into a fantasy book. And Mistborn fits that T, like Ocean's 11. Mistborn fits it. The Greatcoats absolutely fits it. Foundry Side fits it. Book 2 of the Books of Babel definitely fits it. So I really like that, just like fun adventure, like exciting, going from one thing to another, standing for something, standing against the bad guy. No, like if take a book, if at any point during your book you could see a character unironically and within context swinging from a chandelier during a battle, that is a swashbuckling fantasy. And that's the kind of stuff I like. So I really like that as well. So those are probably my top 2. I really like political and economic stuff too. I mean, I don't know. Though I'll stick with military fantasy and swashbuckling fantasy, with an honorable mention for flintlock fantasy. There just isn't enough flintlock fantasy, but I really like muskets and rifles and cannons within my fantasy books as well. Boosh. Number 5, who is one of your auto-buy authors? I actually didn't have a bunch of these before this year, and now I have several. So auto-buy authors, I will buy, Sir Terry Pratchett is no longer with us, but if Pratchett was still releasing books, it would absolutely be Terry Pratchett. But now, Sebastian de Castell, I love the Greatcoats so much, I will buy anything he writes. Josiah Bancroft, I love the Books of Babel so much, I will buy anything he writes. Now it's John Gwynne. I love Malice and Valor so much that I'm absolutely going to pick up Time of Dread, like, right afterwards, and I'm going to get Shadow of the Gods, because that's, we're reading that in a buddy read, and, you know, anything he writes, I mean, I'm essentially going to read it. And I would probably add to that R.F. Kuang as well. Even though I had problems with The Burning God, I loved the Poppy War trilogy enough to where it didn't really break my enjoyment of the series overall, and so I can't wait to see what Kuang puts out next. So that was 4, so that'll suffice for now. Boosh. I'll buy anything they write. Number 6, how do you typically find recommendations? Goodreads, YouTube, Instagram, etc. I find recommendations now almost solely through people I know and trust. I do watch, I watch a bunch of BookTube, and like when I hear people talk about books I've never heard of, if it sounds cool, I'm like, oh heck yes. So BookTube is the main answer to that. How I sift through all the BookTube stuff is by talking to people whose opinions I know. Like, even if it's not opinions that they share with me, like they don't like necessarily the same stuff as me, I've developed some really good friendships here on BookTube in the last year, and so it's gotten to the point where with several people, and then with me, I would assume, you can kind of tell or predict with decent accuracy what they're going to like. I didn't love this book, but I think there are things in this book that you would enjoy. This book coming out, oh, Alan, you're definitely going to enjoy this book. Oh, I read this. It talks about all these things that you like. It's like before I read Mistborn, Elle and Jesse were just like, everything you described that you like in fantasy books, Final Empire, read that. So I get most everything from BookTube and then filter it through the random Discords and my friends and stuff like that. So a lot of books I'm exposed to through buddy reads, because buddy reads will be the end of us all. Buddy reads are just like, if you've read The Crucible, Giles Corey, when they accuse him of being a witch, he's not. He's just some old dude who walks around the town being like, ugh. When they lay him down and they just put the stones on him, and that's how they kill him. They just keep putting more stones on him, and he's just like, more weight. That is us with buddy reads. We're just like, more weight, until they just crush us and suffocate the life from us. And, no one's left. And nobody lived. Boosh. Number 7, what is an upcoming fantasy release you're excited about? So, I have 4, maybe. The Book of Babel is probably my most anticipated release, because the Fall of Babel, because this will close out the Books of Babel. This is the 4th book by Josiah Bancroft in the Senlin books, as I call it. So that's probably my most anticipated release, because it'll finish that series, and I can see kind of where that series lies on the hierarchy. I am also very, very much looking forward to Play of Shadows by Sebastian de Castell, a new book set in the world of the Greatcoats. So super excited about that, to start a new Greatcoat series. And I'm also jazzed about Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, which starts a new series from him, which is actually about Vikings, so we'll see. I like the ones that was about the Celts. Am I going to like the one about the Vikings? And also Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee, because I really like Jade War or Jade City, and I hope to read Jade War soon before Jade Legacy comes out, so I'm looking forward to that as well. I actually have a video about this. If you haven't seen it, it's right there, the top, the 3 books I'm looking forward to coming out this year, so check that out if you haven't. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it as far as books that I know that are coming out this year. Boosh. Number 8, what is the misconception about fantasy that you'd like to lay to rest? So, a lot of the problems with fantasy have been like a lot of the stigmas around fantasy have been removed since I was growing up and in high school. Like when I was in high school, me and my D&D friends, we were not the cool kids. D&D was not a mainstream thing. You didn't see commercials for Dungeons and Dragons. And fantasy books were not like nerd. That's who read fantasy books. You're sitting there reading and girls across the campus see what you're reading and they just point and go, nerd! That was fantasy books when I was growing up. And that stigma is largely gone. Not completely, but largely gone. A misconception about fantasy, and this is really just about more modern fiction books in general, and especially on the academic level. We need to let these bleeding kids in school read some frickin' fantasy books to say that there is nothing to be learned from these fantasy books, and we can only learn something from paid by the word Dickens. Some of the themes that we see in these classic works are also present in these modern works. Fantasy talks about so many important themes, at least to me. It talks about, it's a way to explore justice and, equality and good versus evil and morality and integrity. I see this all the time in fantasy novels. In fact, those are the fantasy novels that I'm drawn to. The ones that stand for something and are really about some kind of just stance for what is right. That happens I would argue that it happens more in fantasy books than it happens in any other genre. And so I just don't understand why College Board can't get it through their heads to allow some freaking modern fantasy books on the AP curriculum. You can learn how to analyze a modern day fantasy text the same way you can learn how to analyze some stodgy old dust covered book that your grandma found in the attic. Now, there's nothing wrong with classics. I mean, I don't enjoy a lot of classics just because of the dense writing style. There are some that I really like. But as I said in the Q&A video, we are teaching our students to hate reading. These kids, they go through high school and they never read anything else ever again because we don't let them read anything they want to read. We are making them hate reading because we think that there's no, like, there is stuff to glean from the fantasy and science fiction genres. It is not just literary fiction that has the only lessons to be taught. And that is the misconception that must needs be quashed. Boosh. Number 9, if someone had never read a fantasy before and asked you to recommend the first 3 books that come to mind as places to start, what would those recs be? Okay, the most basic of, like, fantasy books that is, like, not classic. Like, Tolkien is, you know, he's the genre setter. But I would not recommend that to someone who's never read fantasy because it's, you know, dense and ponderous at times. Dragons of Autumn Twilight. If you have read the glorious Dragonlance Chronicles by the esteemed Wise and Hickman, man, what a tropey adventure. But that was exciting. Dragons of Autumn Twilight, Dragons of Winter Night, Dragons of Spring Dawning, yeah. What fun books that just explore, like, it's extremely tropey in the same way that Tolkien is, but much easier to read, much more approachable to the layman. I would absolutely just read the Dragonlance trilogy. Do that. It's just so, man, like, what a great introduction, I think, to fantasy. I think Greatcoats would also be, Trader's Blade would be a great entry point as well, because there's not a ton of, like, you know, world building, like, genre specific stuff, and it's just a fun kind of, as I said, swashbuckling adventure, good time. I think Trader's Blade is really easy to read as well. And let me see, what else? Maybe Mistborn, Final Empire. Final Empire is a good starting place because it's not super dense. And the magic system and the world building isn't really hard to understand because if you've read Mistborn, Sanderson, he explains it in great depth. She threw a coin to, you know, jump through the air. We know she dropped a coin, Sanderson. Like, we get it. So he is very explicit multiple times about how the magic system works. And it is also a really good, really just fun adventure as well, like a heist. So people, I'm recommending, they almost certainly watched Ocean's 11. Oh, I love that Ocean's 11. Here you go. Like read Mistborn. It's like that. So those are my recommendations. Boosh. And finally, last question. Who is the most recent fantasy reading content creator, that is long, like booktuber, I'm going to say booktuber, that you've come across that you'd like to shout out? So, my most recent booktuber that I come across is Luke Edwards. And if you are not watching Luke's channel, please do. Just the intro video, like the channel trailer he has when you go to his channel, where it's making fun of booktubers who are like, oh, I've read like 1,000 books this month, but it all sounds much better because it's in his British accent, and so it just sounds even more like, oh, The Hobbit, that's cute, and it is so freaking funny. He's a new booktuber. Definitely go and support him if you are not doing that yet. It'll be linked down there in the description. Go support his channel. He just put up his Mistborn series review. I have not been able to watch that yet because I have not finished the series. But a man after my own heart with the thumbnails, his thumbnail, just like my thumbnail for Mistborn was, is him throwing coins. So I love that. Please follow him and show him some love. Him and Posh Allen would get along well. Boosh. So guys, that is it for me with this Get to Know the Fantasy Reader tag. Hopefully you feel like you have gotten to know me better. If you have not done this, if you are a fantasy booktuber and you have not done this, consider yourself tagged. I have no idea who's done this. It's too old for me to kind of figure it out. The original tag is by the Book Pusher. I will link that original tag down there. Sorry I did not say that at the very beginning. That's all I have for you today, guys. As always, information about my Patreon and Discord is down in the description, and I will see you guys next time.